Tonight, on Lurking Moon, a chilling compilation of 7 terrifying paranormal encounters experienced by morgue and funeral home workers.
Maple Hall goes quiet in a way that other hallways in the building don't, and by my 3rd week on the overnight shift, I'd learned to trust that silence right up until the night it stopped meaning anything at all. I was still a trainee then, shadowing the senior aides on rounds, learning which residents slept light and which needed 2 people to reposition. My supervisor had stepped away to handle a medcart delivery at the nurses' station, which left me alone to finish the 11 o'clock check on the East Wing. That's when I saw her, standing near the locked exit at the far end of the hall, where the corridor dead ends into a door that only opens with a maintenance key. She was an older woman in a cardigan the color of oatmeal, standing with the kind of patience you only see in people who've spent a long time waiting for something. I didn't recognize her from my resident log, but new trainees don't know every face yet, so I figured she was someone recently admitted, maybe confused about the hour. "Ma'am, you should be in bed," I said, walking toward her. "Can I help you find your room?" She turned to look at me, and her face held an expression I can only describe as hopeful. "Is breakfast ready?" she asked. I told her breakfast wasn't for hours yet, that it was still in the middle of the night, and she nodded like that was an answer she'd heard before and accepted without much disappointment. Then she turned and walked into the room beside her, the door falling shut behind her without a sound. That room was 114. I only knew that because I'd been told during orientation that it was empty, had been empty for weeks, waiting on maintenance to fix a plumbing issue before the next resident could be assigned. Empty rooms don't get visitors at 11 at night. I knocked before entering, out of habit more than expectation. Nobody answered. When I pushed the door open, the room was dark and undisturbed, exactly the way I'd been told to expect. Bed stripped to the mattress, closet empty, no belongings anywhere. No woman in an oatmeal cardigan standing anywhere inside it. I checked the closet, I checked behind the door, I even checked under the bed, feeling foolish the entire time, telling myself I'd misjudged the room number in the low hallway light. Nothing. The room held nothing but the low hum of the heating vent and the particular stillness that comes with a space nobody's occupied in a long time. I found my supervisor at the nurses' station and asked, as casually as I could manage, if we had a new admission that evening. She said no, nothing new, and asked why. I described the woman, the cardigan, the question about breakfast, and watched her face change in a way that made my stomach drop before she even said anything. "That sounds like Mrs. Aldridge. She passed almost 2 months ago. Room 114 was hers." I wanted an explanation that made sense, something about lighting, about exhaustion, about the mind playing tricks during a first solo round. My supervisor didn't offer one. She just told me to finish my rounds and log the room as clear, the way I would any other night. I went back to check room 114 one more time before the shift ended, mostly because I needed to prove to myself that nothing had actually happened. The bed was still stripped, still bare, exactly as maintenance had left it, except now there was a clear indentation pressed into the mattress, the shape of someone having lain there recently, someone with enough weight to leave a mark that hadn't been there an hour before. Folded neatly on the pillow, positioned the way you'd leave something for someone to find, was an oatmeal-colored cardigan. I never learned where that cardigan came from. Housekeeping had no record of storing any of Mrs. Aldridge's belongings in that room, and nobody could explain how an empty, sealed space had acquired a fresh mattress indentation and a folded piece of clothing overnight. My supervisor logged it as a lost and found item and moved on, the way people do when the alternative is too unsettling to sit with for long. I still work the overnight shift on Maple Hall. Most nights are exactly as they're supposed to be, but every so often, usually a little before the early breakfast trays go out, I feel like someone is standing at the far end of the corridor, patient and waiting, wondering if it's finally time to eat.
The front door chime at Whitaker & Sons has a particular sound, a soft double ring meant to be gentle for grieving families, and it's not supposed to go off after midnight when the doors are locked and the viewing rooms are empty. I was resetting chairs in the main parlor, the part of the job nobody talks about when they hire you, straightening rows after an evening service and dimming the sconces one by one. The building was supposed to be sealed up for the night. I'd already checked the side entrance in the loading bay myself, same as every shift. So when that chime rang out from the front lobby, I figured I'd missed a luck somewhere and some family member had wandered back for a forgotten umbrella. I walked out front expecting an apology and an umbrella. Instead, I found a man standing just inside the doors. Tall, thin, dressed in a dark suit that looked a little dated, the kind of cut you don't see much anymore. He had pale, papery skin and a stillness to him that made me think he'd been standing there a while before the chime even registered. "I'm sorry, sir, we're closed for the evening. Viewing hours start again at 9 tomorrow." He looked at me like the words hadn't quite landed. "I need to see Eleanor," he said. "I need to say goodbye." I told him, as politely as I could manage at that hour, that we didn't have anyone by that name currently at the funeral home. Our board only listed 2 families that week, neither one involving Eleanor. He didn't argue. He just nodded slowly, like he'd expected that answer and had decided to wait anyway, and asked if he could sign the guest book before he left. I saw no harm in it. People grieve in strange ways, and a signature costs nothing. He crossed the lobby toward the podium where we keep the book for visitation weeks, picked up the pen, and wrote something slow and deliberate, then turned, walked back through the doors, and was gone before I thought to offer him a coat for the cold outside. I didn't see him cross the parking lot. I didn't hear a car. I went to check the book out of simple curiosity, and that's where the night should have ended normally, with a name I didn't recognize and a story I'd forget by morning. Instead, I found a signature that read Walter Henshaw, time-stamped 12:17 a.m., in handwriting far more elegant than most guests manage. I didn't think much of the name until Eleanor Henshaw's transport arrived at 4 a.m. The intake team wheeled her in on schedule, paperwork in order, nothing unusual about the case itself. While the funeral director reviewed her personal effects, he pulled a small, worn photograph from the pocket of her cardigan, tucked in like she'd carried it for years. It showed a man in a dark suit, pale and thin, staring out from decades past with the exact stillness I'd seen in the lobby a few hours earlier. "That's her husband," the director said, glancing at the photo without much reaction, the way people do when death has stopped surprising them. "Walter, passed 9 years back, I believe. She never remarried." I didn't say anything at first. I just stood there running the timeline through my head. The chime, the suit, the name in the guest book, all of it arriving hours before Eleanor ever crossed our doors. There was no way for him to have known her name in advance. No call log, no early paperwork, nothing on the board that night. I checked the sign-in book again before my shift ended, half expecting the entry to have vanished, the way things do in stories people tell each other to scare each other. It hadn't. Walter Henshaw's signature sat there in that same elegant hand, dated hours before his wife had ever been scheduled to arrive. I still work the overnight shift at Whitaker & Sons. Most nights are exactly what you'd expect. Quiet halls, sign-in sheets nobody uses, chairs that need resetting after evening services. But every so often, usually a night before a name I don't recognize yet shows up on the transport schedule, the front chime rings on its own, soft and polite, right around midnight. I haven't opened the door since.
The work order said routine camera audit, floor B2, overnight window only, since that's the one stretch of hours when nobody's running film transports through the basement corridors. I've done a dozen of these contracts across Cleveland hospitals. Check the feed quality, swap out failing units, log timestamps against the server. St. Bartholomew's system was old, patchy in spots, and camera 14 on B2 kept dropping frames near the old record storage area. That's the camera that showed me the woman. I set up my laptop at the security desk around 11, running diagnostics while Gary, the overnight guard, made his rounds upstairs. The monitor wall in that office is nothing special, just 18 grainy feeds cycling through hallways nobody uses much after visiting hours end. B2 doesn't get public traffic. No patient rooms down there anymore, just record storage, a decommissioned lab, and mechanical space. The corridor's locked from both ends, key card only, and I didn't have the code that night. I didn't need it. I just needed the footage. Camera 14 kept glitching every time I pulled up the live feed, so I walked down to check the housing myself. Service corridor lighting on B2 runs dim, half the fixtures swapped for energy savers that never got fully wired in. I found the camera bracket loose, tightened it with my multi-tool, and headed back to the desk to confirm the picture cleared up. It had. Sharp image, steady frame rate, corridor empty, just like it should be. Then a woman walked into frame. She came from the direction of the old records room, moving slow, wearing what looked like a hospital gown, pale enough that the low light made her almost blend into the wall behind her. I sat up straight and grabbed the radio. "Gary, you on B2? "Negative, I'm up on 3. Why?" I didn't answer right away. I was watching her stop halfway down the corridor and just stand there, facing the camera. "I've got someone on camera 14. B2 supposed to be locked." "It is locked, both ends. I checked it myself at 10. I told him I'd go look, mostly because I didn't trust what I was seeing enough to just log it and move on. I took the stairwell down, badge in hand, though I knew my contractor badge wouldn't open restricted doors. Both ends of the corridor were locked exactly like Gary said. No key card reader showed recent activity. I stood at the north door and looked through the small wire mesh window into a dark, empty hallway. Empty. No woman, no gown, nothing but the dim service lighting and the loose ceiling panel I'd just fixed. I went back to the security desk and pulled up the recorded clip to confirm what I'd seen, thinking maybe it was a reflection, a lighting glitch, something explainable. The footage showed exactly what I remembered. Woman in a pale gown, walking the corridor, stopping to face the lens. Then I noticed something in the clip I hadn't caught live. In the recording, my own figure walks into the frame seconds later, checking the camera bracket, exactly like I remembered doing. Except in this version, she's still standing there, behind me, close enough that if I'd turned around, I would have been looking right at her. I hadn't seen her when I was down there. I know that much. I would have felt it, heard something, some sense of not being alone. Instead, I just tightened a bracket and walked away like the corridor was empty the whole time. "Gary," I said into the radio, quieter this time, "can you come down to the security desk a second?" He watched the clip with me twice. Neither of us said much. He pulled the access log again, confirmed no badge had opened either door on B2 since 6 that evening. The building's own records showed the corridor sealed the entire time I was down there. I finished the audit. I had to. Contract work doesn't stop because something inexplicable shows up on a hospital security feed. I flagged camera 14 for replacement anyway, more out of instinct than diagnostics, and moved on to the next floor before my shift ended. The next morning, I pulled the archived footage one more time before submitting my report, just to make sure I hadn't imagined the whole thing. The clip was still there, time-stamped, unedited. But when I checked the live monitor snapshot the system auto-saves every few minutes for the incident log, the one captured at that exact timestamp showed something the recorded video didn't. In the snapshot, I'm alone in the frame, tightening the bracket, corridor empty behind me. Same second, same camera, 2 different versions of the same 60 seconds, sitting side by side in St. Bartholomew's server, and nobody at the hospital has been able to explain which one is the true recording of what happened on B2 that night.
Breakfast prep at Hawthorne Manor starts at 4 in the morning, hours before most of the residents wake, and I was setting up the dining room tables the way I always do when I found an extra place already sitting at table 13, coffee cup and all, at a table that should have been bare. I've worked the kitchen at Hawthorne long enough to know every resident's seating chart by heart. Table 13 sat empty since the week before, ever since Mr. Eugene Larkin passed in his sleep. He'd had that same seat for years, the one closest to the window, and the staff hadn't reassigned it yet, out of what I figured was just respect, giving the family time before someone else took his spot. I picked up the plate setting, plate, cup, silverware, and carried it back to the kitchen cart, figuring one of the aides had set it out of habit before clocking off the night before. I finished the rest of my prep, pulled trays from the walk-in, started the coffee urns for the morning shift change, and didn't think much more about it. When I walked back into the dining room 20 minutes later, table 13 was set again. Same plate, same cup, coffee poured this time, steam still rising off it like it had just been made. "Somebody's messing with me," I said out loud, mostly hoping to hear another voice answer back and prove it. Nobody did. The dining room stays empty until residents start filing in around 6, and the kitchen door was locked the way I'd left it, same as always. I picked the plate setting up, dumped the coffee, wiped down the plate mat, and went back to loading the toast into the warmer. Mr. Larkin used to take his toast cut in triangles, not squares, a detail I only knew because he'd complained about it more than once when the kitchen got it wrong. By the time I checked the dining room a third time, table 13 was set a third time, coffee poured, toast on the plate, cut into triangles. I stood in the doorway a long moment, tray cart handle still gripped in my hand, feeling the kind of exposed you feel when you're the only person awake in a building full of sleeping people who depend on you to have everything ready by the time they wake up. The dining room lights hummed overhead, the only sound besides my own breathing and the distant clatter of the coffee urn finishing its cycle in the kitchen. "Mr. Larkin," I said, quieter than I meant to. Nothing answered. I hadn't expected it to. I cleared the setting a third time, checked the kitchen door lock again just to be sure, and pulled up the security camera feed on the small monitor by the prep station, the one that covers the dining room for after-hours liability reasons. I scrubbed back through the footage from the last 20 minutes, empty room the whole time, table by table, chair by chair, Nobody walked in, nobody walked out. The camera showed table 13 sitting bare one frame and set with a full breakfast the next, with nothing in between to explain the difference. I didn't set that table again. I left it bare, finished the rest of my prep, and told the morning charge aide what had happened when she came in for shift change. She didn't seem as expected as I expected she would. Said residents' routines sometimes linger longer than the residents do, especially the ones who'd been there for years, and that table 13 had given the overnight staff trouble more than once since Mr. Larkin passed. What she couldn't explain was the tray count. The kitchen logs every breakfast tray served each morning against the resident roster, standard practice for billing and dietary tracking. That morning's count came back one tray over what the active resident list called for. When the day supervisor pulled the discrepancy report, the extra tray had been marked with initials in the dietary log, EL. Nobody on staff that morning had written those initials in. I know because I checked the sign-in sheet myself, twice, looking for some explanation that would let me stop thinking about it. I still work the early kitchen shift at Hawthorne Manor. Table 13 sits empty most mornings now, chairs pushed in, nothing out of place. But every so often, when I walk into that dining room before the sun's up, I half expecting to see a cup of coffee steaming there that nobody poured.
The monitor panel at my desk on the maternity wing lights up whenever a crib mic picks up sound, and I was doing charting around 1 in the morning when crib 4 lit up green, transmitting soft breathing from a room that's supposed to be closed and empty. I've worked the night unit clerk desk at Legacy Emanuel long enough to know the observation room layout without thinking about it. Crib 4 sits in the small overflow room past the nurse's station, the one biomedical services closes off whenever census drops low enough that we don't need the extra bassinet space. No infant listed there, no chart open, no admission log, nothing on my census sheet showing that room in use. I glanced at the panel, figured it was a wiring glitch, and kept charting. The monitor system is old, prone to picking up interference from other units on the floor, crosstalk between channels that biomedical's been meaning to fix for over a year now. The breathing kept going, steady, small, the particular rhythm of an infant's breath, nothing like the static hiss interference usually makes. I got up and walked down to check, mostly to prove to myself it was nothing. The overflow room door was closed, same as always, dark inside except for the small standby light on the empty crib. I flipped the switch, checked the crib itself. Stripped mattress, no linens, no infant, exactly like it should be. I stood there a moment, listening to nothing but the hum of the hallway lights, then walked back to my desk. The monitor panel had gone quiet by the time I sat down. Maybe 20 minutes later, it lit up again. This time, it wasn't just breathing. A soft cry came through the speaker, weak and thin, the kind of cry a newborn makes when they're too tired to really commit to it. I sat frozen for a second, staring at the panel before I made myself get up and check again. Same room, same empty crib, no infant anywhere in sight, door still locked the way I'd left it. "There's nothing here," I said out loud, mostly for my own benefit, needing to hear it confirmed by a voice besides the one in my head. I closed the door again, walked back to my desk, and tried to focus on my charting. The monitor panel stayed dark for a while. I convinced myself the interference had worked itself out, whatever glitch had been causing it. Then, closer to 2 in the morning, it lit up a third time. I turned the volume up this time, wanting to hear it clearly instead of guessing at what I was picking up through the small desk speaker. Breathing first, slow and even, then the cry again, weaker than before, fading in and out like a signal losing strength. And underneath it, so faint I almost missed it, something that sounded less like static and more like a person trying to hush a baby, a soft shh sound repeated 2 or 3 times. I didn't go check the room again. I sat at my desk, listening to that monitor transmit sound from an empty crib in a closed room, and felt the particular kind of alone that comes from being the only person on a maternity floor at 2 in the morning who's supposed to have an explanation for something and doesn't. The signal kept transmitting on and off for most of the next hour. I logged each instance in my notes, mostly because I didn't know what else to do with what I was hearing, and paged biomedical services first thing when the day shift started coming in. The technician who came to look at Crib 4's monitor found something that made him go quiet for a minute before he said anything to me. He pulled the unit apart at the nurse's station, checked the battery compartment, and showed me it was empty. Biomedical had removed the battery from that specific monitor the previous evening, part of routine equipment rotation before an inventory count. The unit shouldn't have been capable of transmitting anything at all. He checked the system log anyway, more out of procedure than expectation. It showed an active signal from Crib 4 running for 42 minutes overnight, time-stamped exactly across the hours I'd been sitting at my desk listening to it. That's not possible without a power source, he told me, holding the empty battery compartment like it might explain itself if he looked at it long enough. I didn't have anything to add to that. I still work the same desk most nights, and Crib 4 sits in that same closed room, no battery, no reason to transmit anything at all. But every so often, usually somewhere close to 1 in the morning, I catch myself glancing at the panel anyway, half expecting that green light to come on again.
The doors at McLeod and Graves get locked at 9 sharp, and after that, the building belongs to whoever's on overnight, which most weeks means me. I was doing my walkthrough that Tuesday, checking that the prep room cooler was holding temperature and the morning's paperwork was staged at the front desk, when I heard a man's voice coming from the family viewing room. Soft, apologetic, the kind of voice you use when you've done something you can't take back. I've worked nights at the funeral home for a little over 2 years now. Before that, I did loading bay work at a distribution center, which sounds like nothing in common with this job, but it isn't really. Both are about making sure things move through a building quietly and on schedule. Caskets, deliveries, doesn't matter. You keep the flow going, and you don't ask questions. That's what I told myself, anyway, before that Tuesday night made questions unavoidable. The viewing room was supposed to be empty. We had a service booked for the next morning, a woman named Ruth McLeod, no relation to the owners despite the shared name, just a coincidence Mr. Graves had mentioned in passing. His casket wasn't even in yet. The room should have held nothing but an empty stand, a few rows of chairs, and the particular stillness that comes with a space waiting for grief that hasn't arrived. Instead, when I opened the door, I found an older man sitting in the front row, hunched forward, talking to the empty casket stand like there was someone lying on it. I should have said it sooner. I know that now, Ruth. I know. I stood in the doorway with my key ring still in my hand, and every instinct told me to say something ordinary. That's the job in the end. Even when nothing of the moment is ordinary, you fall back on procedure. "Sir," I said, "I'm sorry, but the building's closed. Visiting hours don't start until tomorrow." He turned to look at me, and there was nothing frightening about his face at first. Just tired. Just an old man's grief worn soft around the edges, like he'd been carrying it a long time. "She's not here yet," he said, "but she will be. I wanted to get here first. I wanted to say it before everyone else does." I asked him how he'd gotten in. The front doors lock automatically at 9, and the side entrance requires a code only staff have. He didn't answer that. He just looked back at the empty stand and kept talking, low and steady, apologizing for things I couldn't make out, things that sounded old and specific and private in a way that made me feel like an intruder in my own workplace. I did what you do when you can't make sense of something at 1 in the morning. I told him I needed to step out and get my supervisor, even though my supervisor was home asleep and wouldn't be in until 7. I turned around, walked to the front desk, and when I came back 4 minutes later with a flashlight and a security procedure half-formed in my head, the viewing room was empty. Chairs in their rows, casket stand bare. No sign anyone had been there at all. I told myself I'd imagined it. Long nights do that. But I couldn't shake the way he'd said her name, like it was something fragile he was afraid of dropping. The next morning, the remains arrived on schedule. Ruth MacLeod, 78 years old, and when I helped prep the paperwork with the day attendant, I learned her late husband had passed 6 years earlier. Heart failure, sudden, no time for last words. Nobody could explain why an unfamiliar man would show up the night before her service. Nobody but me had seen him at all. I didn't say anything to my supervisor that morning. What was I going to tell him? That a ghost had gotten past our locks to apologize to a woman who wasn't dead yet at the time I saw him? I just filed it away and went home to sleep through the daylight like I always do. It was the tissue box that got to me 3 days later when I was resetting the viewing room for the next family. I picked it up to refill it and found a single used tissue tucked inside, and beneath it a funeral card, old, creased at the corners like it had been carried in a wallet for years. The name on it was a man's, Ruth's husband, the one who died 6 years before her. Nobody at the funeral home put that card there. I checked with every staff member on rotation, and nobody claimed it. Nobody remembered seeing it. Nobody could explain how a keepsake belonging to a dead man ended up inside a box of tissues in a room he'd never been allowed back into. I still work the overnight shift. I still do my walkthroughs, and I still check that room before I lock up for the night. Most nights it's empty, but some nights, when the building's quiet in that particular way that makes you hold your breath without meaning to, I swear I can hear someone in there apologizing to a woman who still hasn't arrived.
The snow was coming in sideways off Gastineau Channel the night I pulled up to the loading dock at Bartlett Regional for what should have been a single routine transport, and by the time I made it to the funeral home 20 minutes later, my paperwork had a second name on it that nobody could explain. I've driven transport for the funeral home for a few years now, which means I'm the one who gets called out at all hours to collect remains from the hospital and bring them in for the families waiting on us. Most nights it's straightforward: sign the release, load the gurney, drive careful on whatever roads the weather's given me. Juneau winters make the job harder than people expect, but the actual work rarely surprises me anymore. That night broke the streak. The pickup sheet I'd been handed at the funeral home listed one name, a man, 78, deceased that afternoon after a long stay on the medical floor. Standard release, one decedent, nothing unusual on paper. I backed the van up to the dock, badged through with the night attendant, and got the gurney loaded, same as always, the cold coming off the covered stretcher in that particular way it does when you've been doing this long enough to recognize it without thinking about it. The morgue attendant, a guy named Walter I'd worked with plenty of times before, signed off on the single release like it was any other night. One body, one name. I didn't question it because there was nothing yet to question. It wasn't until I was backing out of the loading bay, checking my mirrors against the snow coming down harder by the minute, that I caught something in the rear window reflection. Two shapes on the gurney, not one. Two covered forms side by side, where I knew for a fact I'd loaded only a single stretcher. I put the van in park right there in the loading bay and got out to check, snow already collecting on my shoulders before I'd gone 10 feet. I opened the back doors, and there was exactly one gurney, one covered form, same as I'd loaded it, nothing out of place. I stood there a minute with the wind cutting through the open doors, telling myself the window reflection had played some trick with the dock lighting, and got back in the van because the roads weren't getting any safer the longer I stood around second-guessing myself. I checked the mirror again once I was moving. Two shapes, steady, unmoving, exactly where they'd been before. I drove the rest of the way with my eyes flicking to that mirror more than the actual road, which isn't smart in a Juneau snowstorm, and I know that, but I couldn't stop myself. Every time I looked, the second shape was still there, riding along beside the first like it belonged. By the time I got to the funeral home and backed into our receiving bay, my hands weren't steady the way they usually are on loading. I checked the van interior directly this time, no mirror between me and the truth of it. One gurney, one body, exactly what the paperwork said. I brought the transport documentation inside to file it, still shaken enough that I wanted to get the paperwork done and go sit somewhere quiet for a minute. That's when I saw it, a second name, typed clean into the second line of the pickup sheet, right below the name I recognized from the hospital. A name I'd never heard before, no service scheduled under it, nothing in our system that matched. I called Walter back at the hospital, told him there seemed to be an error on the sheet. He checked his own copy, told me flatly there was only ever one release that night, one name, and he had no idea what I was talking about. I didn't push it further. There wasn't anywhere useful to push.
I filed the paperwork anyway, because that's the job, and somebody in records would sort out whatever clerical mix-up had happened, except when I went back the next day to double-check every copy in our system, the original, the funeral home's file copy, even the carbon still sitting in my clipboard, carried that same second name, consistent across every version, like it had always been there. I still drive night transport when the calls come in. I still make the same run out to Bartlett's loading dock more nights than I'd like during a Juneau winter. But I check that rear mirror now every single time I pull out of that bay. And some nights, when the snow's coming down heavy enough to blur the reflection, I swear I can still make out a second shape riding along in the back, patient as anything, waiting on a ride nobody remembers arranging. What I've never been able to explain is the carbon copy still sitting in our archived files. Same second name, printed clean as the rest of the form. Beside it, a pickup time that doesn't match that night at all. A date and hour from 15 years earlier, long before I ever started this route.